Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another very special edition of WOWSA Live, coming from 3 different places around the planet with Ned in Cork, Ireland. Ned?
Hello, everyone. I'm the current chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have a special guest with us today who was my predecessor as the chair of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, Chris Guesdon. Say hello, Chris.
Good evening. Well, it's good morning here, but good evening and to everybody, and glad to be able to talk to you, Steve and Ned.
Chris, give everybody a short introduction to your 50 plus years, is it, I think, of marathon swimming and administration and organizing and everything else.
Quick summary, huh? Well, obviously, 50 years ago, I entered in a race called the Truth Big Swim across Port Phillip Bay, mainly because we've been swimming around the Derwent River, and my colleague who was working with me at the time, Dick Campion, he said, well, why don't you go in that thing? I said, and nobody knew the preparation you needed to have. And anyway, I went in it, and that's all I can say about it. But I moved on into admin, which led me into the long distance swimming, as it was called then, as well before they called it open water. Via a surf club. I started in the swimming pool and played water polo, just like most of the people around. When we got into the surf movement, most of us, and they still do around this country, get into long distance swimming, and because they're used to swimming in the ocean. When you've got 100,000 surf lifesavers running around the country, all active. But then in 1988, that was all individual stuff, doing swims on the river, etc. You know, back in 1973, when we started the Derwent River Marathon, when I first tried it, FINA decided to take over in 1986 marathon swimming, and I don't think they understood that all these bodies around the world, like the Channel Swimming Association and Santa Barbara and all these other places right around the country, around the world, in fact, Capri to Naples and Lake St. John, they weren't joining up with FINA, and they still haven't. They decided to take over long distance swimming, and in Australia in 1980, that was 1986, and 1988, each state in this country were invited to send a representative, of which there was a dozen of us, and it's a good story. I can send it to you. I just found this cutouts the other day about it. And everyone they selected to come onto that committee to start off long distance swimming in Australia, 5 of those 12 became the nucleus of the committee that lasted a decade and took Australia to where it was in the 90s. And as it turns out, those 5 are in the Australian Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, and 2 of them are in the international one. So they picked the right people at the time, the states, because the pool people, being pool-centric, most countries are with their national body, they actually don't know anything about our sport. So they were smart. They went and got people who did. So, and one thing led to another, and from Australia to FINA to the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame when I was inducted there. And then Dale Bretonic said to me, I said, we should be able to, I can help you with that. He said, it's all right, you're on the list, you're here. And it was about the same time he sent the same note to you. But that was smart. He needed some people to help him because he was doing it on his own. So 50 years, long distance swimming, then open water and marathon, 20 international swims, over those the early years. But I've always maintained that I was an administrator who could swim a bit. That's how I describe myself. Now, if people argue, oh yeah, but you'd be able to swim. I said, yeah, but I do the thinking and the strategy on the admin side better, because that's what I did for a work.
We should probably mention after 20 or 30 years of build-up for the run-up to the Olympics, you had a key role towards the end of all of that.
Well, I did. Other people kicked the goals for me, but when Dennis Miller and Sid Cassidy and I got appointed to FINA back in 1996, and we were sitting at this meeting in Prague, and I thought, mistakenly, God, there's 6 national presidents here. How easy is this going to be to get the Olympic Games in? Well, I soon learnt is that the Bureau makes decisions, and 1 or 2 people kick the goals for that Bureau. So we had to slow down a bit. But we always planned, once we came up with the concept, there were plenty of people saying that they've been talking about having the Olympic Games forever, and they have. And they've had big events in Australia, swims, and they also had them in the United States. I was reading one of Steve's articles the other day about it. But most of these Olympic people or FINA people, all they like to do is come down and watch an event, have the nice food, have a few drinks, and go away. Like, where's the plan? There wasn't one. So Roger Smith, who was a vice president on FINA, and he lived in this town, he actually said to me when I was appointed, because they don't select, they appoint you to FINA, he said, if you do nothing else, you need to come up with an alternative for the marathon swim to be included in the open water swim to be included in the Olympic Games. And I said, why? We were out on the River Derwent at the Trans Derwent swim, which is a 100-year-old swim, being safety officers. And he said, well, we've decided at Bureau level the 25K is not going in. If you don't come up with something else, if someone doesn't come up with something else, and you just stay like you are. And he said, if you do nothing else, come up with something in your tenure. And I did some research and found that football matches, movies, a lot of the Olympic events like the 40K track swim ride and the marathon run, and so it goes on, were about 2 hours. So it had nothing to do with 10K. What I decided to do was come up with something that was easy to manage, not so costly, just to get the swim into the Olympic Games. And as it turned out, it all happened. We were hopeful it was going in with triathlon, who also developed an Olympic distance event. You know, there was no way in the world they're going to have one of these things, 100-mile bike ride and a full marathon run and all this sort of stuff lasting all day and half the night. They're not going to have that sort of thing. It's not entertainment. So, and thus not commercially viable. So I ended up coming up with a 2-hour event, sitting with a colleague of mine who was a production manager for a national television station here, Channel 7, and he said, you know the answer, when he asked me about it. And I said, why? What is it? He said, it's entertainment, so you've got to close it up. So in the end, we came up with a circuit swim, which most marathon swimmers didn't like, and yet they do it in other events, and about 2 hours. Now these, which ended up being 10,000 metres, and then a few people like Sid Cassidy said, oh no, we've got to have 10K. I said, well, if you want the name changed, let's change it. I always thought 10,000 metres had married up with the 10,000 metres on the track. There was a synergy there, but others saw it another way. And anyway, we've ended up with it, and all we've got to do is make sure we keep it in the Games. Yep. So that's how it all started. But when I left FINA in 2000, the group there, Shelley took my spot in the game on FINA, and they end up making it an event for the World Championships, which we decided in 2000, even though the Olympic people told me, Dennis Minnitt told me this when he was on the Olympics, just because your event's in the World Championships of your own sport, that doesn't mean it's going into the Games. It's not a prerequisite. So there are all these little challenges you find out when you're weighing around. See, for example, at the same time we got into the Olympic Games, the 10K has been put in as an alternative sport into the Commonwealth Games. But no country, including Australia, have picked it. We had the Games here twice while that was in, and it gets down to the sport and that country's Commonwealth Games Association to select the events, and they usually select events that they'll get medals. Well, they think they'll get medals, you know, which is fine. So they didn't have much faith in us back then. But still, that's the way it goes.
Well, thank you for your contribution. I know there are some marathon swimmers who really dislike the 10K. However, I don't know any marathon swimmers who don't like the fact it's in the Olympics.
Correct.
So
And that was always my question when I was going for with the argument, Ned and Steve. They used to tell me that, oh, it's not a real marathon, it's this, it's that, it's something else. And I used to look them straight in the eye and say, do you want to be in the Olympic Games or don't you?
yeah. Let's change the subject a little bit and move on to the Australian Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. Congratulations, you and your gang have now launched it. Tell us about your motivation, Chris, for initiating this newest hall.
Okay, when you're in lockdown with this coronavirus, it gives you plenty of time to do some thinking, which is the key. And I talking with Sir, and I said, listen, from time to time we've talked about having a Hall of Fame in this country, because Swimming Australia don't have one for the pool swimmers. They don't have it. And a couple of years ago, I was talking to the program manager up there, and I said, well, there's going to be a Hall of Fame start very shortly in Australia. Little do we know we weren't going to do it for 2 years later. But they weren't interested. I was really trying to feed them, to get them to do it. Anyway, what happened was that during the lockdown, I thought there needs, whilst there are some great websites, Open Waterpedia is one, WOWSA is another, Marathon Swimming Federation is another, and there are dozens of little ones around the world, that Australia really didn't have one that recognised the people who had made a significant contribution to open water swimming in this country, and had achieved by having a very, very good career. And career was the key of the whole thing. I also recognise, and I've spoken to you about this, Ned, that it's very, very hard to get people to nominate or be nominated. You've actually got to go out hunting. So we decided that I'd write to 5 people, which I did, with a strategy, not tactics, a complete strategy. Did they want to be part of it, and what role could they play in it? Only 5 of us, and everyone's got a role. Well, there's 6 of us really, because Sue does half my work for me. Yeah, Sue Guesdon. And within 24 hours, everyone said, yes, I'll be in that. Let's have a Hall of Fame, because it really has a very good stamp of credibility, a Hall of Fame, all around the world. There are 2 types. There's the Memorial Hall for famous people, and then there's the Hall for recognition of people who have had an illustrious career in their own sport or the work they do. We chose the latter, because some of these people are well known, some are famous, but most are not. In fact, when we went to have a look at it, and Open Waterpedia were very helpful. Evan Morrison was very helpful. A number of international people that I knew were very helpful, and our local knowledge in Australia, and we found 500 names.
Wow.
Because we're going back 100 years here, since the first person, Annette Kellerman, in 1905. So we were covering a big period of time, and it was quite, there's thousands. And in fact, I just noted nothing, a friend of mine, Paul Ellerkamp, who's got oceanswim.com, and he was going to come onto the committee, but we've decided we're going to do something with open water per se, outside of the marathon. And in the year before, last year, they had 658 events in this country, 45,000 swimmers. These are in races, individuals. The year before, it was 957 events, lower this year because of the CV, and they had 53,000. 29 people, went over and did the English Channel last year. There are marathon swimmers all over this country doing their thing, even though Australian swimming don't have the 25K championship anymore. And what basically happened there was, when they decided, well, we won't have that anymore because the Olympic event is 10K, all the coaches and swimmers of endurance effort, they decided to go elsewhere. And we're seeing it now. It's amazing the amount of swimmers that are around the place. But getting down to a part of that question, how do we identify them? How many were there as a starting point? The criteria is quite clear on our Facebook page when we set the criteria, whether it be races or endurance swimmers. There has to be the distance, 10K plus. That's what FIDA have called a marathon, so that's the end of that. And that the criteria shouldn't be prescriptive or precise, that you have won X amount of gold medals, you have done 19 swims over 10 years, 5 years is too short. We decided not to do that. That the people should be, if the criteria said you had to have a good career, essentially in the marathon swimming world, you weren't to compete against each other. In other words, I know we have a ballot in the International Swimming Hall of Fame. We don't have a ballot. The people are not competing against each other. If they qualify, they should be considered to go in, a yes or a no. Not we'll vote for 5 of them and the other 5 can go if you had 10 on a ballot. It's just a different way of doing it. And because I always maintain when you start looking around that these people select themselves. They actually select themselves. See, they've had a career and it's confirmed by event results on various websites and a bit of local knowledge and those newspaper reports. You can put them all together. It's easy to find them. There are a lot that probably might think they should be recognised in the honour roll, because that's what we have here, an honour roll. But if they haven't done enough events, whatever they are, well, that's not a career.
How did the 5 of you agree on this first class or this first group? Did you have long discussions on Zoom? Did you have a secret ballot on SurveyMonkey? Did you a combination of things?
No, how that happened was once we decided we were going ahead and what the criteria would be, that our first installation, the inaugural group, should reflect history back to 1905. So the first 17 we picked are on the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. They were easy, they were already done. Screened, tick, that's 17. And we didn't want to have more than 20 odd each installation, but once we'd gone through it, and all of them had to do their bit about going through various websites and finding swimmers, and when we found hundreds, not just tens, lots of tens, we had to put in more. And that's why we've got 3 installations, not in any particular order, in status for this what we call financial year till the next June, which is the 4th one. But the first one, we did want it to reflect history. So the 17 from the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame, that covered really a lot. We decided to pick everybody or select everybody, as long as they had had a career, that had won a medal at the World Swimming Championships. Not all these other things, but the World Swimming Championships that FINA run, not the other people. And then we decided to pick people that have had more endurance capability. So we picked the Ocean's 7, one person who happened to be there. And so by the time we went through all the medalists and the Australian members of the Swimming Hall of Fame, we were just about there. But I, like you, Ned and Steve, none of these swimmers do anything without a team. And so we looked at, historically, the ones who had been on a lot of the national teams, had been on a lot of the endurance swims around the country and around the world. And so we ended up with 8 contributors, 4 of which were coaches. 1 was a technical official, a referee, and 3 were handlers. And that's how we got to 37.
How did you do the public announcements? Did people know such a thing was happening before you announced it?
Yes. all that operational stuff aside, and part of the strategy was to have a Facebook and Instagram. We're not going for a website. There are two websites, Open Waterpedia and also Marathon Swimming Federation, that suits it, that satisfies us. And when you go to those sites, you can find the people. Look at what they've done. I don't like wasting time by renewing it again. It's not necessary, not for a nation. It is for an international body to have their own website. But how do we announce it? We, through one of the people that is currently on our committee, Gary Taylor, a professional journalist with contacts all around the country and swimming world. We got him on board and he wrote the article and he launched that media side of it. Reported on some television stations, but most importantly, we got it to Open Waterpedia and also to Marathon Swimming Federation. And they announced it as well, and we announced it on our own website. What I can tell you is that when we decided to do this, we put out 3 teasers. Look, something's coming, it's exciting for Marathon Swimming. And because we had our logo there, and teased it out. And when we announced the inaugural group, it had 20,000 hits straight away. Because people, they knew the word marathon. Australia's going to have one. Marathon swimmers, we don't have to worry about the pool swimmers. And suddenly we had 20,000. And as we, and we've stole a bit of your kudos here, Ned. Whilst they were all announced together with a link to Open Waterpedia, Steve's going to be updating their bio, but more importantly, every 2 days we announce a swimmer or a person, and they're getting a pretty good following. Some of them up to 10,000. It's quite amazing. So when we decided it was time to have one of these things in Australia, all the research I'd done and the results I'd got, I knew I was making the right decision. So that's why I put a team around me to help, because no one can do it on their own, and the rest is history. I have to say, the original thinking, getting the team on board, identifying the first 37 as it turned out, because we did identify a couple of hundred, but they're still being assessed in another area, the rest of them. And we did, and then launched it in 6 weeks.
So one of the things that I tell people to worry about on Hall of Fame is the reaction to the first class, and what you can do to minimize the number of bricks being launched. And it's interesting on the Australian Hall that you're not waiting a year before your next consideration. You're going to do, for the first while, a quarterly induction, which can potentially take the heat out of the disappointment or anger for somebody's son that thinks they should be in that isn't.
Well, that is correct. But as I pointed out earlier in this interview, we're talking about 100 years here in Australia, and there was no way in the world that we haven't had at least 100 swimmers once a year, one a year. So we decided early in the piece, whilst we wouldn't, put them all out first go, that we'd stagger with no status on being first or fourth, 4 installations for the first 12 months of our operation. And then my guess is, unless some more swim, it might be less, because we decided that people can nominate and they'll be accepted by the group, that their career is satisfactory at any time. This is not an annual thing or every 3 months. Someone could nominate someone right now, and once they're assessed, yep, that person fits, and they could go in. That might not mean they'll be announced straight away, because there may not be room. When I say room, we want to keep it down to around 20 to 25 a quarter, if we can. And it may be, as I pointed out to them the other night, that we've only had the first brush there might be as many again kicking out there, because a lot of these people, even though I've been around for 50 years, I don't know some of these people. I actually have to investigate them and find, crikeys, I didn't know all that was happening with him, because you don't know everything. It's nice to know some of it, though, especially when they come up with some examples. But anyway.
So a couple of differences in the International Swimming Hall of Fame and the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have a committee of selectors or voters. The last three new Hall of Fames we profiled, ice swimming, Vermont, and Ireland. All the inductees get a vote. They're much smaller than and have a shorter history than what you have in Australia. Your initial plan is to stay with this selection committee. What were the elements in that decision for you?
Well, firstly, we could have brought in a bigger group and changed the group regularly, and they could be honorees, or they could be staff. They could people just have an understanding of the sport, and that may happen. But to try and do that in the first instant, that was actually going to be too hard. We wouldn't get anywhere. I'm not the first to say that committees don't make decisions, individuals do. And what we had to do is get the strategy right. And the strategy was to pick some really good people, which we've done, and the 5 of the 6 of us do it. But I guess another part of the answer to your question is if you have the honorees do it, or yet another group, it's just another job to find out their email address and their phone numbers and their communication. And you're aware, like I am, that about a third of the people's contact details change annually. So you could be talking to for us to send out an email to everybody, the first 37, and get the current one, it was a nightmare. It was another job in itself. And I thought, we're actually not about that. We've got access to 2 international websites, one in particular, Open Waterpedia. They will do the job for us by recording the honour roll. If we can email everybody, that's fine. We'll certainly do the profile, because it's always good in a sport to keep on the back page every week. That's what that was about. Pinched an idea from you, but it's you must, if you want to keep the profile up, you've got to be on the back page. You'll notice I said the back page because they don't put us on the front page. All the other chaos goes there. The sport goes on the back page. And that's what you've got to do for every week. So that's what that was about. Will the next group who take over from us in a couple of years, and we will identify some people to do it, not to throw the work out, but you've got to have fresh eyes all the time. Fresh eyes. You come up with different ideas. It's all part of strategy, and it's easy to come up with tactics. It's just a list of things to do and tick them off as you do it.
So interesting with the 4 recent Halls of Fame. Ireland is leveraging the website from the Irish Long Distance Swimming Association and Open Waterpedia. Vermont is leveraging Open Waterpedia. Ice swimming has its own website, but as you correctly point out, every one of these things you do has an ongoing human maintenance cost to it. And the more of that you take onto yourself, the more bodies you need to find to do the work in the future.
That's exactly right. And that's what we, pardon me, the original strategy that I had in my mind was that we needed to set this thing up, find a mechanism to find people, prospective honorees, a place to put them with the least amount of maintenance. Now, the 5 people here all have their different responsibilities, and they don't need 2, they only need 1 responsibility, and then they actually do it. But none of us get any money out of this. You know, there's no financial reward. But more importantly, I didn't want there to be financial outgoing of which someone might have to pay for either. It's meant to be a balance. What we wanted to do was clearly recognise the careers of marathon swimmers all around Australia. They must be an Australian citizen, by the way, and have them posted on an honour roll, because no one else was doing it. And as I pointed out earlier on, Swimming Australia still don't have one. You know, I saw you mentioned earlier that you know, Australian football got the Hall of Fame. There's the Sport Australia Hall of Fame, and the Cricket Hall of Fame, and there are others as well, but not pool swimming. I did, when I last spoke to them, which was a couple of years ago, that they said that there were so many Australians that were good, there were too many for a Hall of Fame. I thought to myself, why would you say that? Why would you say that? In other words, you don't want to recognise the best of the best. If they only wanted a handful in, which is fraught with danger, you just put the criteria up. That's how to stop it. But why would you want to stop it? You know, even in the Olympic Games, which is predominantly pool swimming, 35% of the gold medals that have been won by Australia have been won by the swimming team. They can't help being pretty good. Yeah. So why would you recognise the people who actually got them? Anyway.
So Chris, we're gonna wind it up at this point. Thank you very much for driving the idea through from the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. Every one of these national, local, regional halls of fame